In March 6 of 1857, we have the Dred Scott decision. Now, this involves a slave from Missouri who had traveled to Illinois and Wisconsin with his master. This had happened years before. In 1846, when his master died, the slave, Dred Scott, sued, and he said, I'm free, I'm a free man. And when people said, why do you think you're free? He says, well, my master took me to a free state, and as soon as I set foot on soil in a free state, I became a free man. And then I voluntarily returned with my master to a slave state, but I was a free man the whole time, and now that he's dead, I'm leaving. Dred Scott keeps winning in the lower courts because, honestly, he's got a really good argument. His opponents begin claiming, though, that he has no standing to sue. They say he's property, he's not a person. Black people can't sue. They don't have rights. Then when it gets to the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice, Roger Taney, you may remember him from the Bank War, will issue one of the most bizarre, nonsensical decisions in American history. He will begin by throwing out the suit, saying that Dred Scott is property, and property isn't citizens, and they can't sue. He says, essentially, black people have no rights whatsoever. But even though he throws the case out and says there is no case to begin with, he still writes a decision, which is the part that doesn't make sense. He says that it violates the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution to take someone's property away without due process of law. Actually, the Fourth and Fifth Amendments. He claims the Missouri Compromise was always unconstitutional because the federal government doesn't have the right to ban slavery anywhere because that's depriving people of property. Now, think about this. The Supreme Court has now ruled that no one, the states or the federal, well, I guess the states can, but the federal government cannot ban slavery at all, anywhere. The South, of course, is delirious with joy. They think they've won. They think it's all over. They think the slave side has won and the free soilers are defeated. The North, of course, begins running on elections, saying that they have to win so they can put more justices on the court and reverse this decision, which they, of course, see as terrible. Buchanan kind of endorses Dred Scott. He doesn't really do anything very clearly. He's very timid. He also supports the slave Kansas. Kansas writes its pro-slave constitution, but the free soilers refuse to participate. They actually gather and write their own constitution, so Kansas has two state governments. The free constitution is called the Lecompton Constitution. They refuse to allow voters to vote on it. And when the legislature is elected, the free soilers win, and then they put the slave constitution to a vote, and it loses in a landslide because all the people from Missouri aren't there. Both sides are crooked, by the way, but there were more free folks than slave folks in Kansas. The House refuses to annex Kansas because it's a mess. Stephen Douglas opposes annexing Kansas and is able to kill it. Kansas will not be able to join until 1861. After the Civil War has begun, it's going to come in as a free state. But while the Union is together, the South won't let Kansas come in. In 1858, Illinois politician named Abraham Lincoln will challenge Stephen Douglas to a debate over the Senate seat. Lincoln's going to run as a Republican. Douglas is going to run as the Democrat. These will be the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and they will turn Abraham Lincoln into a leader of the party. Douglas refuses to take a position on slavery, and Lincoln says he supports slavery where it is, but he does not want it spreading to any more states. He claims that if blacks can be owned, why can't whites? He claims a slippery slope argument. If we allow slavery of blacks, why won't there be slavery of whites one day? Lincoln is not an abolitionist. Lincoln does not call for the end of slavery. In fact, he never calls for the end of slavery right up through the end of his life. This is one of the great misunderstandings about Lincoln. He was also racist. He thought blacks were inferior and could not take care of themselves. He believes that slavery should be left where it is, and eventually it'll die out on its own. In 1858, he loses. In fact, the Republicans lose generally. The Dems keep the Senate. They do lose the House, I should say. And so we have a divided Congress, a weak president, and the government is able to do nothing in a time when it really needed to be able to do something. And I blame the Civil War. Part of it is westward expansion. Part of it is, of course, slavery. Part of it is the argument over states' rights. But we should also not let the weak, ineffective politicians we had at the time off the hook. This was a failure of leadership. And I would argue that Lincoln is part of that failure of leadership, in my opinion. October 16th, 1859, John Brown, the guy who had done the Potawatomi Massacre in Kansas, with the financial support of Northern abolitionists, will gather a group of supporters as well as black men and will seize the fort at Harper's Ferry. This is a government fort that's today in West Virginia, but then was in Virginia. He believes that this will inspire slaves to rise up in revolt and will start a slave rebellion. It does not. No slaves rise up in revolt. It's a disaster. Curiously enough, Robert E. Lee, who's one of the most impressive military officers in the American Army at the time, will lead the troops to capture John Brown. 10 of Brown's followers will die. Brown will get captured, and he'll be hung and killed for treason. He will become a great martyr to the North. They will write poems and sing songs about the great John Brown. To Southerners, this is clearly a Northern plot to end slavery once and for all, and it convinces the South that there will be no compromise, that the Northerners just simply can't be dealt with. That's not true. He was just one crazy guy with some financial backing, but that's not the way the South sees it. The election of 1860, one of the most important elections in American history. At the Democratic National Convention in Charleston, South Carolina, which was a really dumb place to hold your convention, right? Because everybody knows that Charleston is the seat of the Southern secessionist movement. The South wants a strong defense of slavery. The Western Democrats want popular sovereignty. They want to keep letting people vote, even after Kansas. Of course, they're the ones voting, though. They're Westerners, right? And when the convention adopts a popular sovereignty platform, 8 Southern states just walk out of the convention. Even with those 8 Southern states gone, they still can't agree on a candidate, and they decide to have a second convention later because the party is so divided they can't pick one person to represent them. The Baltimore Convention nominates Illinois' Stephen Douglas, and so the Southern Democrats nominate their own candidate, Breckinridge of Kentucky. The Whigs support and their high tariffs, internal improvements, the Homestead Act, which will move settlers out into the West on government land, and government-funded, privately owned railroad. The Whigs also support popular sovereignty. They say that congressional or territorial legislatures could not decide for the territories. When they became states, the voters in those countries would have to decide themselves. This would prevent most slave owners from moving there because you don't want to move there, set up a plantation, only to find out later that slavery is illegal. And so this basically meant that all these states would be free. So popular sovereignty was really just a mask for free states. Lincoln is nominated by the Republican, and he's seen as a great choice, not because he's a great leader or a great speaker or something, but because he's seen as moderate on slavery. He just wants to prevent the expansion of it. He's fine where it is. And he's obscure. He's unknown. So he doesn't have enough history to be controversial. He has no real stance on popular sovereignty, for example. So Lincoln isn't chosen because he's some great, wonderful leader that they all see as the future of the party. He's chosen largely because nobody knows who he is. A third candidate will jump into the race, Bell, late in the race, and he'll try to appeal to Democrats who don't want to secede, and his whole goal is to keep the Union together. Well, when you split your vote 3 ways, as the Democrats do, between Douglas, Bell, and Breckinridge, you make it really easy for the other side to win. So Lincoln wins despite only getting less than 40% of the vote. The Republicans actually lose Congress. The Democrats get far more votes in this. The South is disgusted by the result of this election. Lincoln gives 14 speeches between the day he's elected and the day he's sworn into office, and not one time does he say one word to try to calm the South or prevent it from seceding from the Union. It's my belief personally that Lincoln wanted the South to secede from the Union, that he picked this fight on purpose. And so before Lincoln is even inaugurated, we're going to see the first Southern state, South Carolina, secede from the Union because they see Lincoln as a president they simply cannot live under.